The Starboard Hope was 3 weeks into deep space when the distress signal came through. It was weak, broken, and in a language no one on board had ever heard. But a distress signal was a distress signal, and Captain Megan Harris was not the kind of woman to ignore someone in trouble. Jake Collins stood at the observation window and watched as the ship changed course. He was 32 years old, a pilot and first contact specialist, and he had seen a lot of strange things in his years among the stars. But something about this signal made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "You feel it too?" Danny Ortiz asked, stepping up beside him. Danny was Jake's best friend and the ship's communications officer. They had been through a dozen missions together, and Danny knew Jake better than anyone. Jake nodded slowly. "Something's off. That signal is old. Whoever sent it has been drifting for days." The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel an hour later. What they found made everyone on the bridge go silent. A massive warship, bigger than anything humanity had ever built, floated dead in the void. Its hull was torn open in a dozen places. Fires had burned out long ago, leaving only black scars across silver metal. Biles. Whoever had attacked this ship had wanted it destroyed completely. Captain Harris turned to Jake. "Take a team. See if there are any survivors." Jake gathered 4 crew members and suited up. The shuttle ride to the alien ship was short and quiet. No one knew what they would find inside. When they cut through the airlock and stepped into the darkness, Jake felt like he was walking into a tomb. The ship was cold and dead. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows down the empty corridors. Jake moved forward with his team close behind. They found bodies. Tall, elegant beings with silver blue skin and sharp features. They had died fighting. Weapons were still clutched in their hands, and the walls were marked with burns from energy blasts. "What happened here?" One of the crew members whispered. Jake did not answer. He kept moving, searching for any sign of life. They had almost given up when he heard it. A faint sound, like metal scraping against metal. He held up his hand and his team stopped. Jake moved toward the sound alone. He found her in what looked like a command center. She was trapped under a fallen beam, her leg pinned at an awkward angle. Her silver blue skin was covered in cuts and bruises, and her dark eyes burned with a fire that made Jake stop in his tracks. She was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he had ever seen. The moment she saw him, she moved. Despite her injuries, she grabbed a blade from the floor and swung at him with deadly speed. Jake barely dodged in time. The blade cut through the air inches from his face. "Easy," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm here to help." She did not understand his words, but she understood his meaning. And she did not care. She attacked again, faster this time, and Jake had to use every bit of his training just to stay alive. She was wounded and trapped, and she was still the most dangerous fighter he had ever faced. Jake managed to catch her wrist on the third strike. For a moment they were locked together, her eyes boring into his. Then he twisted, and the blade clattered to the floor. She hissed something in her language, words that sounded like a curse. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said slowly. He pointed to himself. "Human. Friend." She spat at his feet. Jake sighed and called his team forward. Together, they lifted the beam off her leg. She tried to stand on her own, but her wounded leg buckled and she started to fall. Jake reached out and caught her arm to steady her. The reaction was instant. She grabbed his throat with her free hand and slammed him against the wall. Her grip was like iron, and her eyes were filled with pure rage. She spoke in a low, dangerous voice, and though Jake could not understand the words, the meaning was clear. She was telling him that she would kill him. Jake did not fight back. He kept his hands open and his eyes on hers. After a long moment, she released him and stepped back. She was breathing hard, and there was something in her expression that Jake could not quite read. Fear, maybe. Or pain. The universal translator on his suit finally caught up. It had been recording her words and working to decode the language. When it spoke, its voice was flat and mechanical. Touching a Kethrani without permission is punishable by death. You have been warned, human. Jake rubbed his throat and nodded. Understood. No touching. Got it. They brought her back to the Starward Hope. The medical team treated her wounds while she watched everyone with the eyes of a trapped animal. Captain Harris tried to speak with her through the translator, but she refused to answer most questions. All they learned was her name, Zyrith Vale, and that she was someone important among her people. Jake was assigned to watch over her. He brought her food and water, and he sat outside her door when she slept. She did not thank him. She barely looked at him, but she did not try to kill him again, and Jake counted that as progress. On the third day, she finally spoke to him. Why do you show your teeth? Jake blinked. What? You do it constantly. You bare your teeth at me and the others. In my culture, this is a threat. A challenge. Jake realized she was talking about smiling. He had smiled at her when he brought her dinner. It was something he did without thinking. He tried to explain that for humans, showing teeth was a sign of friendliness, of happiness. She stared at him like he had lost his mind. Your species is very strange, she said finally. Jake laughed. You have no idea. Zyrith told them what had happened to her ship. A rogue faction within her own empire had attacked them. They were traitors who wanted to overthrow her father, the Emperor. They had tried to kill her because she was the heir to the throne. The only reason she survived was because her guards had died protecting her. Captain Harris saw an opportunity. If they helped Zyrith return home, they could forge an alliance between humanity and the Kethrani Empire. It was exactly the kind of first contact mission the Starward Hope had been sent to find. Jake watched Zyrith as the captain explained the plan. Her face was hard, unreadable. But when she looked at Jake, something flickered in her eyes. He smiled at her again. She told him she would kill him if he did not stop. Jake just kept smiling. The journey to Kethrani space would take 12 days. 12 days trapped on a ship with an alien princess who looked at humans like they were insects. 12 days of tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jake had survived worse, but not by much. Captain Harris made it official on the first morning. Jake was assigned as Zyrith's liaison. He would be responsible for her needs, her safety, and making sure she did not kill anyone on the crew. Jake was not sure if the captain was rewarding him or punishing him. Zyrith made her feelings about the arrangement very clear. I do not need a human following me like a lost animal, she said when Jake came to escort her to breakfast. Captain's orders, Jake replied. Besides, someone has to make sure you find the mess hall. This ship can be confusing. She gave him a look that could freeze water. I have memorized the layout of your vessel. I have memorized the layout of your vessel. I could find my way blindfolded. Jake believed her. He had seen the way she studied everything around her, taking in every detail with those sharp, dark eyes. She was a warrior, trained to know her surroundings at all times. But orders were orders, and Jake was not about to let her wander the ship alone. The first few days were difficult. Zyrith had nothing but contempt for humans and their ways. She mocked their need for sleep, calling them weak for requiring so many hours of rest. She laughed at their food, saying it tasted like nothing. She watched the crew interact with each other and shook her head at their constant touching, their hugs and handshakes and pats on the back. Your species has no boundaries, she told Jake one evening. You touch each other constantly. You share your emotions like they are gifts to be given away. It is strange. It is foolish. Jake shrugged. Maybe. But it's also what makes us strong. Xyrith scoffed. How can weakness make you strong? Jake did not have a good answer for that. Not yet. He challenged her to a sparring match on the 5th day. The ship had a small training room, and Jake thought it might help build some kind of understanding between them. Xyrith agreed, though she made it clear she would not hold back. She destroyed him. It was not even close. Jake was a good fighter by human standards, trained in multiple combat styles, experienced in real battles. But Xyrith moved like water and struck like lightning. She put him on the ground in less than 30 seconds. Jake got back up. She put him down again. And again. And again. Every time he fell, he stood back up. His lip was bleeding. His ribs ached. But he kept getting up. Finally, Xyrith stepped back and stared at him. Why you not stay down? You cannot win. Jake wiped the blood from his mouth and smiled. Humans don't know how to quit. It's one of our best qualities. Something changed in her eyes. It was small, barely noticeable, but Jake saw it. A flicker of something that might have been respect. They sparred every day after that. Jake never won, not once. But he got better. He lasted longer each time. And Xyrith began to teach him, correcting his stance, showing him how to block her strikes. She never said she was helping him. She just did it. The crew started to notice the change. Xyrith was still cold and distant, but she had stopped threatening to kill people. She ate meals in the mess hall instead of alone in her room. She even answered questions when crew members spoke to her, though her answers were always short and sharp. Danny pulled Jake aside one night. What are you doing with her? My job, Jake said. Danny shook his head. That's not what I mean, and you know it. You look at her different. Like she's not just some alien princess we're escorting. Jake did not deny it. He could not explain what he felt, not really. Xyrith was dangerous and proud and difficult. She had tried to kill him the first time they met. But there was something else underneath all that armor. Something real. He found her on the observation deck late one night. She was alone, standing in front of the massive window that looked out at the stars. Her reflection floated in the glass like a ghost. She did not turn when he entered, but she knew he was there. My father used to bring me to the high towers of our palace, she said quietly. We would watch the stars together. He would tell me that one day, all those lights would be part of our empire, that I would rule them when he was gone. Jake walked up beside her. He did not stand too close. He had learned to respect her space. Now I do not know if I will ever see him again, Xyrith continued. The traitors may have already killed him. I may be the last of my bloodline, and I am here on a human ship, unable to do anything. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. Let me tell you about Earth. She looked at him, surprised. Humans almost destroyed ourselves a dozen times, Jake said. Wars, plagues, disasters. We came close to ending everything more than once. But we never did. Every time we fell, we got back up. Every time we lost hope, we found it again. That's what humans do. We survive. Xyrith studied his face. You truly believe this? I've seen it. I've lived it. And I'm standing here with you right now because humans never learned how to give up. The silence between them was different now, softer. Xyrith turned back to the stars. But something in her posture had changed. The tension in her shoulders had eased, just a little. Perhaps, she said slowly, your species is not as weak as I thought. Jake smiled. We're full of surprises. She did not threaten to kill him for smiling this time. Instead, she almost smiled back. Almost. They stood together in the darkness, watching the stars drift by. Neither of them spoke again, but they did not need to. Something had shifted between them. A bridge had been built, small and fragile, But real Jake knew the journey ahead would be dangerous. He knew that enemies were waiting for them in Kethrani space. He knew that Xyrath might never fully accept him or his people. But as he stood beside her in the quiet of the observation deck, he also knew something else. He would fight for her. He would bleed for her. He would stand beside her against whatever came. And he would not give up. Not ever. They were 2 days from Kethrani space when the enemy found them. Jake was eating breakfast in the mess hall when the alarm started screaming. Red lights flashed across every wall, and the ship shuddered like something had hit it hard. He dropped his food and ran for the bridge. Captain Harris was already there, shouting orders at her crew. The main screen showed 3 warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, their weapons already glowing with power. They were Kethrani ships, but they flew the colors of the rogue faction. The traitors had sent assassins. "They found us," Xyrath said. She stood beside the captain, her face hard as stone. "They will not let me reach my father alive." The first shot hit the starboard Hope like a hammer. The ship lurched sideways, and people fell to the floor. More shots followed, each one shaking the vessel to its core. The human ship was tough, built to survive the dangers of deep space, but it was not a warship. It could not take much more of this. "We need to run," Danny said from his station. "We can't fight 3 ships." "We can't outrun them either," Jake replied. "Their ships are faster than ours." Captain Harris looked at the screen, her mind working fast. "Then we buy time. Jake, take a shuttle and a boarding team. Hit the lead ship and disable its weapons. If we can take out their flagship, the others might back off." It was a suicide mission. Everyone on the bridge knew it. But Jake did not hesitate. He nodded once and turned to leave. Xyrath grabbed his arm. For a moment, she said nothing. Her dark eyes searched his face like she was looking for something. Then she let go. "Do not die, human," she said quietly. "I have not given you permission." Jake smiled. "I'll do my best." The shuttle launched into chaos. Energy blasts lit up the void around them, and Jake had to fly like a madman just to stay alive. His team held on tight, their faces pale but determined. They were volunteers, every one of them. Humans who had chosen to risk everything for a mission that might not succeed. They hit the enemy flagship hard, cutting through the hull with emergency docking clamps. Jake was the first one through the breach, his weapon up and ready. The Kethrani warriors inside were waiting for them. The fight was brutal. The enemy soldiers were fast and deadly, their movements sharp and precise. But Jake's team was determined. They fought like demons, pushing forward step by step through the corridors of the alien ship. Humans fell, wounded or worse, but the survivors kept going. Jake led the charge. He had learned from Xyrath, and he used every lesson she had taught him. He blocked strikes that would have killed him before. He found openings that he never would have seen. He was still not as good as a Kethrani warrior, but he was good enough that they reached the weapons control room after what felt like hours. Jake's arm was bleeding from a deep cut, and his body ached from a dozen hits. 2 of his team members were down, and the rest were barely standing. But they had made it. Jake planted the charges himself. His hands were steady even though his heart was pounding. The enemy commander found them before they could finish. He was a massive Kethrani warrior, taller than Xyrath, covered in scars from a lifetime of battles. He carried a blade that looked like it could cut through steel. Behind him stood a dozen more soldiers, all of them ready to kill. "Human," the commander said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You fight well for such a weak creature. But this is where you die." Jake looked at his team. They were exhausted and wounded. They could not win this fight. But they did not need to win. They just needed to buy a few more seconds. Jake smiled at the commander. "Maybe, but I'm taking you with me." He triggered the charges. The explosion tore through the weapons control room and ripped a hole in the side of the ship. The enemy soldiers were thrown backward, and the commander disappeared in a flash of fire. Jake felt himself flying through the air, and then everything went dark. He woke up in the shuttle. Danny was piloting, his face tight with fear. Someone had dragged Jake back to the ship, though he did not remember how. The enemy flagship was drifting dead in space, its weapons destroyed, flames pouring from the hole Jake had made. The other two ships were retreating. "You crazy fool," Danny said when he saw Jake's eyes open. "You almost died." Jake tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. Almost only counts in horseshoes. They brought him back to the Starboard Hope. The medical team rushed him to the sick bay, and Jake drifted in and out of consciousness as they worked on his wounds. He had broken ribs, a punctured lung, and more cuts than anyone could count. The doctor said he was lucky to be alive. When he finally woke up properly, Zyrith was sitting beside his bed. Jake blinked at her, confused. "Aren't you supposed to be on the bridge?" "I was," she said. Her voice was strange, softer than he had ever heard it. "But I needed to see that you had not died." Jake tried to sit up, but the pain made him stop. "I told you I'd do my best." Zyrith looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that Jake had never seen before. Something vulnerable? "You are a fool," she said quietly. "You threw yourself into battle against my own people. You almost died for a mission that should have killed you." "Why?" Jake met her gaze. "Because it needed to be done. Because your life matters. Because I don't know how to give up." She was silent. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched his hand. It was a small gesture, barely anything at all. But Jake knew what it meant. For a Kethrani, touch was sacred. It was trust. "You are the strangest creature I have ever met," Zyrith whispered. Jake smiled, even though it hurt. "I try." She did not pull her hand away. And when Jake closed his eyes to rest, he felt her fingers curl around his, holding on tight. Outside the window, the stars kept drifting by. The enemy was gone for now, but Jake knew they would be back. The real battle was still ahead. But for this moment, in this quiet room, none of that mattered. He was alive. She was beside him. And somehow, against all odds, they had survived, together. Kethra Prime burned beneath them. Jake stood at the observation window, his wounds still healing, and watched the planet grow larger. Even from space, he could see the fires. Cities were dark, where they should have been bright with light. Ships circled the atmosphere like angry wasps. The coup had begun, and it looked like the traitors were winning. Zyrith stood beside him. Her face was like a mask carved from ice, that Jake could see the pain underneath. This was her home. These were her people. And she had arrived too late to stop the destruction. "We will land at the northern mountains," she said, her voice flat. "There is a hidden path to the palace. If my father still lives, that is where he will be making his stand." Captain Harris had argued against it. The Starboard Hope could not fight an entire rebellion. They had barely survived the attack from 3 ships. But Zyrith was determined to go, and Jake was determined to go with her. In the end, 12 humans volunteered for the mission. Danny was one of them, even though Jake told him to stay behind. "You're not leaving me out of this," Danny said. "We started this together. We finish it together." The shuttle dropped through the atmosphere like a falling star. Enemy fighters tried to stop them, but Jake's piloting kept them alive long enough to crash land in the mountains. The impact was rough, and several crew members were injured, but everyone survived. They moved fast. Zyrith led the way through snow and rock, following paths that only she knew. The cold was brutal, and the wind cut through their suits like knives. But no one complained. They knew what was at stake, They reached the hidden entrance after 3 hours of climbing. It was a crack in the mountain, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through. Inside was a tunnel that led deep underground, toward the palace. The tunnel was not empty. Traitor soldiers found them halfway through. The fight was close and desperate in the narrow space. Jake fought beside Xyrith, their movements almost in sync after all their sparring sessions. Humans and Kethrani warriors clashed in the darkness, and the stone walls were painted with blood. They broke through. They kept moving. More enemies came, and they fought through them too. Jake lost count of how many battles they won. His body was screaming with pain from his half-healed wounds, but he refused to slow down. Finally, they emerged into the palace. It was a war zone. The grand halls that Xyrith had described, full of beauty and light, were now filled with smoke and death. Bodies lay everywhere, loyalists and traitors alike. The fighting had been terrible. Xyrith ran. She did not wait for the others. She sprinted through the halls toward the throne room, and Jake ran after her, pushing his body harder than he ever had before. The rest of the team followed, fighting off any enemies that tried to stop them. The throne room doors were massive, carved from black stone and covered in gold. They had been broken open, and sounds of battle echoed from inside. Xyrith burst through without hesitation. Her father was still alive. The Emperor stood in the center of the room, surrounded by his last loyal guards. They were holding off a wave of traitors, but they were losing. The enemy commander, the leader of the entire rebellion, was there, his blade raised for the killing blow. Xyrith screamed and charged. What happened next was chaos. Humans and Kethrani warriors crashed into the traitors from behind. The enemy had not expected an attack from that direction, and their lines broke apart. Jake fought his way toward Xyrith, cutting down anyone who got in his way. The enemy commander turned to face Xyrith. He was the same kind of warrior as the one Jake had killed on the ship, tall and covered in scars. But this one was stronger, more skilled. He and Xyrith clashed in a fury of blades, moving so fast that Jake could barely follow. Xyrith was good. She was one of the best fighters Jake had ever seen. But she was tired and wounded, and the commander was fresh. He was pushing her back, finding openings in her defense. It was only a matter of time before he landed a killing blow. Jake saw it coming. The commander feinted left, then spun right, his blade arcing toward Xyrith's heart. She was too slow to block. She was going to die. Jake did not think. He just moved. He threw himself between Xyrith and the blade. The weapon cut across his shoulder and chest, biting deep into flesh and bone. The pain was like nothing he had ever felt. But he stayed on his feet. He grabbed the commander's arm and held on, stopping the next strike. Now, Jake gasped. Xyrith did not hesitate. Her blade flashed, and the commander fell dead at their feet. Jake collapsed. The world was spinning around him, and he could not feel his arm anymore. Blood was everywhere, more than he had ever seen from his own body. He thought he might be dying. Xyrith caught him before he hit the ground. She held him in her arms, and for the first time since he had known her, there were tears in her eyes. "Fool," she whispered. "Stupid, reckless fool." Jake tried to smile. Had to. Couldn't let him hurt you. The battle was ending around them. The Emperor's guards had rallied, and the remaining traitors were being cut down. But Jake did not care about any of that. He could only see Xyrith's face above him, beautiful and fierce and full of something that looked like fear. "No one has ever bled for me," she said, her voice breaking. "No one has ever stood beside me as an equal." Jake reached up with his good hand and touched her face. It was the first time he had touched her without her threatening to kill him. "I'd do it again," he said. Xyrith stared at him. The tears fell freely now, cutting lines through the dirt and blood on her cheeks. She pulled him closer, her grip desperate, like she was afraid he would disappear. "If you kiss me, human," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "I will kill you." Jake had heard those words before. He had heard them a dozen times, but he had never believed them. Not really. Not when she looked at him like this. He smiled. "I'll take my chances," he said, and he kissed her. For one long moment, everything stopped. The battle, the pain, the entire universe. There was only Xyrath, her lips against his, warm and fierce and alive. Then her hand gripped the back of his neck, and she kissed him back. It was not gentle. It was desperate and hungry, and full of everything she had never let herself feel. Jake held onto her with everything he had left. When they finally broke apart, she looked at him with those dark, burning eyes. "In my culture," she said softly, "a kiss is either a declaration of war or a bond for life." "Which did you mean?" Jake's smile did not fade. "Both," he said. "I choose both." The days after the battle were a blur of pain and sleep. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of soft voices and the hum of medical machines. The Kethrani doctors were some of the best in the galaxy, and they worked on his wounds with a skill that human medicine could not match. But even they said he was lucky to be alive. When Jake finally woke up properly, the first thing he saw was sunlight. Real sunlight, warm and golden, streaming through a window of colored glass. He was in a room that looked like it belonged in a palace, because it did. The walls were carved from white stone, and the ceiling was painted with images of stars and ships. The second thing he saw was Xyrath. She sat in a chair beside his bed, her dark eyes watching him with an expression he still could not fully read. But there was something soft in it now, something that had not been there before. She was wearing clothes of deep blue and silver, the colors of the royal family. She looked like the princess she was. "You are awake," she said. Jake tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His shoulder and chest were wrapped in bandages, and every movement sent pain shooting through his body. He groaned and fell back against the pillows. "How long?" he asked. 5 days. "The doctors were not sure you would survive. Your body is not built like ours." Jake laughed, then winced. "Yeah, I've noticed." Xyrath reached out and took his hand. The gesture was natural now, easy in a way it never had been before. "My father wishes to speak with you when you are well enough. He wants to thank the human who saved his daughter's life. I didn't do it alone. The whole team fought for you. Yes, and 3 of them died." Jake's smile faded. He remembered their faces. Good people. Brave people. They had followed him into a battle they knew they might not survive, and they had paid the price. "They will be remembered," Xyrath said quietly. "I have made sure of that. Their names will be carved into the wall of heroes, beside the greatest warriors of my people. They will never be forgotten." It was more than Jake could have asked for. He squeezed her hand and nodded. The next week passed slowly. Jake healed faster than the doctors expected, which they said was typical of humans. His species might not be as strong or as fast as the Kethrani, but they were remarkably hard to kill. Jake took that as a compliment. Captain Harris and the crew of the Starward Hope were treated as honored guests. The Emperor himself met with them, a tall and ancient Kethrani with eyes that held centuries of wisdom. He spoke to each human personally, thanking them for their help and asking about their world. He seemed genuinely curious about this small species from a distant star that had risked everything for a fight that was not theirs. "Why did you help us?" the Emperor asked Captain Harris during one of the meetings. "You had no reason to involve yourselves. You could have left my daughter on that ship and continued on your way." The captain smiled. "That's not who we are, Your Majesty. Humans don't leave people behind. We don't ignore calls for help. It's not always smart, and it's not always safe, but it's how we are." The Emperor studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, something like respect in his ancient eyes. When Jake was finally well enough to walk, Xyrath took him to the Imperial Council chambers. The room was vast, filled with representatives from every corner of the Kethrani Empire. They had gathered to decide the future, and Xyrath was going to address them. Jake stood in the back with Danny and the surviving members of their team. He watched as Xyrath walked to the center of the room, her head held high, every inch the warrior princess she had been born to be. "I stand before you today because of the courage of strangers," she began. Her voice rang out clear and strong, filling every corner of the chamber. 12 humans came to our world and fought beside us. They did not know us. They had no reason to help us. But they came anyway. They bled for us. They died for us. She paused, letting her words sink in. "We have always believed that strength comes from within, that we need no one but ourselves. But I have learned something these past weeks. I have learned that true strength comes from bonds, from trust, from standing beside others even when the odds are against you." She turned and looked directly at Jake. "Humanity is not weak. They are fierce and loyal and relentless. They do not know how to give up. And they have earned my respect, my gratitude, and my protection." Xyrath faced the council again. "I declare today that any who threaten humanity will answer to the Kethrani Empire. Our peoples will be allies, bound by blood and battle. This is my word as heir to the throne." The chamber was silent. Then, slowly, the representatives began to nod. Some looked uncertain, but none dared to challenge the princess who had fought her way through a rebellion and survived. The alliance was official. That night, there was a celebration in the palace. Music filled the halls, and food was served on golden plates. The crew of the Starward Hope mingled with Kethrani nobles, sharing stories and laughter in a way that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. Jake found Xyrath on a balcony, looking out at the twin suns as they set over the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, more beautiful than anything he had ever seen on Earth. He walked up beside her, and she leaned into him, her shoulder pressing against his. "Do you regret it?" he asked. She looked at him. "Regret what?" "Not killing me when we first met." Xyrath smiled. It was a real smile, warm and open, nothing like the cold expression she had worn when they first met. "I considered it. Many times. And now?" She turned to face him fully. Her hand came up to rest against his chest, over the scars that would mark him forever. "Now I cannot imagine a universe without you in it," she said softly. Jake felt his heart swell in a way he could not describe. He had come to the stars looking for adventure, for discovery, for something bigger than himself. He had found all of that and more. He had found her. He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and slow, with the twin suns burning gold behind them. When they broke apart, Xyrath laughed softly. It was a sound Jake had never heard from her before, light and free. "What happens now?" she asked. Jake looked out at the stars, beginning to appear in the darkening sky. A whole galaxy waited out there, full of danger and wonder and possibilities. "Now," he said with a grin, "we see what's next." Xyrath took his hand, and together they watched the night come alive, across the stars. Humanity had found more than an ally. They had found a future, and Jake Collins had found something he never expected to find among the distant lights of space. He had found home.